The cell door was opened by mistake. That single error would expose a truth the prison never wanted the public to see. A guard stood frozen in the hallway, staring at a man who was not supposed to exist. An inmate officially listed as transferred years earlier, now standing alive behind a wall meant to hold silence itself. Before the alarm could sound, the lights flickered, and the prison's darkest secret began to breathe. Long before that moment, before the mistake, before the door opened, Eastern State Penitentiary was built with a promise. Not a promise of mercy, a promise of control. When the prison opened in 1829, it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. From the sky, it looked like a giant wheel. Cell blocks stretched outward like spokes, all watched from a single center point. Every prisoner could be seen. Every movement could be monitored. The idea was simple and terrifying. Isolation would fix people. No talking, no eye contact, no names spoken aloud. Men were locked alone in stone cells for years. Some never heard another human voice. The system was called separate confinement. Officials believed silence would lead inmates to reflect, repent, and change. But something else happened instead. People broke. At first, the public was impressed. Famous visitors came from Europe. Even writers toured the prison, amazed by its order and quiet. On the surface, Eastern State looked clean, modern, and humane. Underneath, it was something else. The cells were small, with thick walls that swallowed sound. A single slit in the ceiling, called the Eye of God, let in a narrow beam of light. Prisoners ate alone, worked alone, slept alone. If they misbehaved, punishments were quiet but severe. One punishment involved standing in darkness with cold water slowly dripping on the head. Another required being chained to a wall so tightly the prisoner could not sit or lie down. No blood, no shouting, just time. Years of it. By the late 1800s, whispers began to spread. Guards talked quietly among themselves. Doctors noticed strange behavior. Men forgetting how to speak, shaking uncontrollably, staring at walls for hours. But records were clean. Too clean. Eastern State kept detailed logs, but certain things were missing. Transfers that never happened. Disciplinary actions without explanation. Names crossed out and replaced. One name appeared again and again in old ledgers, then disappeared. The man was admitted in the early 1900s for armed robbery. Nothing unusual. He was young, healthy, no prior convictions. According to official records, he was transferred after 5 years. But no prison could confirm receiving him. Decades later, historians reviewing archived documents noticed the gap. The paperwork ended suddenly. No release date, no death certificate, no transfer order signed by another institution. Just silence. At the time, no one asked questions. Eastern State was powerful. It shaped prison systems across the world. To challenge it was to challenge authority itself. Then came the escape. In 1923, a group of inmates planned something impossible. They studied guard routines, memorized sounds, counted footsteps. One man hid tools inside his cell wall, slowly chipping away stone night after night. Against all odds, he made it through the wall. But the escape failed. The man was caught before reaching the outer yard. What happened next was never officially documented. Guards reported he was disciplined. No further details. That same week, a section of the prison was sealed off. Years later, blueprints would reveal something strange. That sealed corridor did not appear on public maps. It was real. As time passed, Eastern State became overcrowded. The isolation system collapsed under pressure. Prisoners were forced to share cells. Silence disappeared. Violence increased. Yet the prison kept operating. By the mid-1900s, reports of abuse could no longer be ignored. Investigations began. Lawsuits followed. Journalists demanded access. Still, certain records remained locked away. In 1971, Eastern State Penitentiary officially closed. The gates shut. The inmates were moved. The building was abandoned. Or so the public was told. Years later, during early restoration work, crews entered blocked-off areas for the first time in decades. Dust covered everything. Rusted doors hung half open. In one corridor, they found cell numbers that did not exist in official records. In another, they found handwritten markings scratched into stone. Names, dates, tallies that suggested someone had been there far longer than allowed. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Behind a false wall, workers uncovered a narrow cell, smaller than the others. No window, no plumbing, no proper door. Inside were remnants of clothing and a metal identification tag. The name on it matched the inmate who had vanished from the records decades earlier. But that was impossible. According to the files, he had left the prison. According to history, Eastern State had been empty for years. So how did his tag end up sealed behind a wall no one admitted to building? Officials offered explanations. Mistakes, misplaced artifacts, construction errors. But one former guard, now elderly, broke his silence. He said there were places in the prison no one talked about. Places meant to disappear people without paperwork. Places where isolation had no time limit. Places where mistakes were buried, not corrected. His statement was never entered into official records, but it was recorded, and it raised a terrifying question. If that man was never transferred, if he never left, then how many others vanished into silence, their stories erased along with their names? As historians continued to dig, they found more inconsistencies. Cells reused without records. Supplies logged for inmates who supposedly didn't exist. Eastern State was not just a prison. It was an experiment. And some experiments failed in ways no one wanted to admit. The guard who opened the wrong door years later would say he still remembered the smell of cold stone and dust. He would say the man inside looked older than his file photo. Thinner, quiet, still waiting. The door was closed again. The report was buried. And the question remained unanswered. What really happened inside Eastern State Penitentiary? And how much of it was never meant to be found? The door that should never have been opened was sealed again. No report was filed. No alarm recorded. No name added to the logbook. The guard was told to forget what he saw. And for years, he did. But silence has a way of cracking. After Eastern State Penitentiary closed, the world moved on. New prisons replaced old ideas. Solitary confinement was questioned. Human rights groups began asking hard questions about the past. Eastern State became a ruin. Rain leaked through broken roofs. Weeds grew in the yards where men once stood in lines. Paint peeled from cell doors that had not opened in decades. To the public, it was history. To those who worked there, it was unfinished business. When researchers finally gained access to restricted archives, they expected dusty paperwork and routine prison logs. What they found instead were gaps, years missing, names removed, entire blocks barely mentioned. One historian noticed something strange. Food supply records showed meals delivered to a wing that officially closed years earlier. At first, it looked like a bookkeeping error. Then another record showed maintenance work requested in the same wing. Then another showed medical supplies signed out. All after the wing was supposedly sealed. Someone had been there. The deeper researchers went, the stranger it became. Guards' shift logs referenced doors that no longer existed on maps. Night patrol notes mentioned sounds where no inmates were assigned. One note stood out. Check corridor after lights out. Do not engage. No explanation followed. Former staff were contacted. Most refused to speak. Some claimed poor memory. Others ended interviews abruptly when asked about isolation cells beyond the official ones. But one man agreed to talk. He had been a junior officer in the 1950s. Young, nervous, grateful for the job. He said there were rules that were never written down. Rules about certain doors. Rules about certain prisoners. He described a system inside the system. Inmates who were considered problems. Men who talked too much, questioned orders, or knew too much about the prison's inner workings. They weren't punished publicly. They were removed quietly. According to him, these men were sent to areas not listed on any blueprint. Cells built within walls. Corridors blocked and reopened as needed. No release dates. No visitors. No letters. He said guards were rotated, so no one stayed too long near those areas. Names were replaced with numbers. Then the numbers were removed too. They stopped being people, he said. That made it easier. When asked if anyone ever left those cells, he paused. Not that I saw. As investigations continued, a disturbing pattern emerged. Several inmates transferred from Eastern State had no arrival records at their supposed destinations. Their names simply ended. Families had written letters asking where their sons and brothers went. Replies were vague. Some received nothing at all. The prison's reputation protected it. Eastern State was seen as strict but modern, progressive for its time. To question it was to question the system itself. Then came a discovery that shifted the entire story. Hidden beneath layers of dust in a forgotten office, researchers found an unindexed ledger. Unlike the official records, this one used only initials instead of full names. Beside each entry was a single, chilling word: held. No release dates. No transfer notes. Just time, passing into nothing. One set of initials perfectly matched the missing inmate, whose metal tag had been found behind that false wall. The ledger showed he was still marked as held years after his official transfer date. That meant someone knew. Someone was keeping track of these lost souls. But the ledger stopped abruptly. The last page was torn out, leaving only questions. As public interest exploded, officials issued statements. They acknowledged the harsh conditions of the past. They admitted mistakes were made. But they vehemently denied any secret imprisonment. There is no evidence, they said, of undocumented detention. Yet the physical evidence was undeniable. The hidden cells, the altered blueprints, the unexplained records. Then, during a routine structural survey, engineers detected hollow spaces inside walls that should have been solid stone. More sealed areas. More terrifying questions. Inside one of these newly found spaces, they found a crude bench carved directly from the wall. Deep scratch marks scarred the floor, and faint symbols were etched near where a bed would have been. Tally marks. Thousands of them. Far too many for a short stay. Far too many for a man who was supposed to have left. Experts debated the meaning. Some said the prisoners marked days. Others believed they marked weeks. Either way, the sheer number suggested years spent in darkness, far beyond any sentence listed in the official records. The guard who had accidentally opened the wrong door all those years ago finally came forward. His testimony was quiet, but clear. The man he saw was old, much older than he should have been. The man's prison file said he would have been in his 40s at the time. But the man in the cell looked closer to 70. That could only mean one thing. He had never left. But if that was true, then Eastern State had either remained active in secret long after its official closure, or it had hidden prisoners within its walls without any record. Both possibilities were terrifying. Officials pushed back hard. They called the claims exaggerated, a misinterpretation of history. But they couldn't explain the hollow walls. They couldn't explain the food records. They couldn't explain the ledger. And they couldn't explain why so many names simply vanished from history. As pressure mounted, the investigation reached a breaking point. A final, sealed corridor was scheduled to be opened for the very first time. Historians, engineers, and officials gathered, holding their breath. The wall came down slowly. Behind it was a narrow hallway. And at the end, one last cell. Inside, there was no body, no bones, just a neatly folded prison uniform lying on the floor. And carved into the cold stone wall, one final, haunting sentence. I was never meant to be found. The uniform should not have been there. It was clean, folded with care, not buried, not hidden, waiting. Investigators stood in silence. No one speaking, no one daring to touch it. The message was clear. Someone wanted this found. The question was when and by whom. The uniform was taken for testing. The fabric dated back decades, matching prison-issued clothing from the mid-20th century. The stitching style had been discontinued long before the prison officially closed. This wasn't a museum piece. It was evidence. Public attention exploded. Newspapers ran cautious headlines. Historians spoke in careful language. Officials issued statements filled with words like uncertain, inconclusive, and under review. But behind closed doors, panic was spreading. Because once the final cell was opened, everything else came back into question. If one prisoner had remained hidden, how many others had vanished the same way? Families of former inmates began calling. Some had been searching for answers for decades. They brought letters, old photos, and records that ended suddenly with no explanation. One mother had kept every letter her son wrote. The last one ended mid-sentence. Another family produced a transfer notice that listed a prison that didn't even exist at the time. Patterns began to form. Men convicted of minor crimes who just disappeared. Inmates who challenged guards or questioned the rules. Prisoners who knew too much about internal operations. They weren't released. They were erased. A legal task force was formed to review Eastern State's final years. What they found was quiet coordination between administrators and city officials. When the prison became overcrowded, secrecy became the solution. Certain inmates were removed from official counts to make the numbers look acceptable. Others were placed in unofficial isolation, where they no longer existed on paper. No paperwork meant no oversight. No oversight meant no limits. One retired administrator, speaking anonymously, admitted something chilling. There were prisoners who didn't belong to the courts anymore, he said. They belonged to the building. As renovations continued, more sealed spaces were discovered. Most were empty, but the damage was already done. The system had allowed people to disappear without a trace. The most disturbing truth came from a handwritten memo found deep in the archives. It wasn't signed. It wasn't addressed. It simply read, "Certain men cannot return to the world. Silence is safer." That sentence ended the debate. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. The final investigation report acknowledged institutional failure. Not criminal intent, just failure. That single word closed the case. No one was charged. Most of the responsible parties were already dead. Eastern State Penitentiary was declared a historical site. Tourists now walk the same corridors where these secrets lived for generations. They see empty cells and hear sanitized stories. But some areas remain closed. Off limits. Not for safety, for silence. Today, the official record lists no prisoners missing from Eastern State. But the families know otherwise. The historians know otherwise. And the walls still know. Because stone remembers what paper forgets. And somewhere inside that prison, behind bricks that were never meant to be touched, the truth waited for over half a century. Patient, quiet, and unseen. Until someone opened the wrong door. Thanks for watching. What do you think happened to the other prisoners? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more hidden stories.